Well, the stars have really aligned for the Dallas-Fort Worth area in a lot of respects. The single most important movement has been from the coasts and the upper Midwest to the Sun Belt. Essentially 100% of the corporate relocations that have happened coming to Texas have been coming to the Texas Triangle.
Could you say, okay, the factors that make an innovation district in North Texas can also make an innovation district successful in Chicago or in North Carolina or in Boston?
It's a great question, Lily, and a complex one.
Welcome to Learning from Leaders, a podcast from Southwestern Medical Foundation where we dive into a world of wisdom, mentorship, and innovation, exploring the insights and life lessons of seasoned community and business leaders. I'm Michael McMahon, President and CEO of Southwestern Medical Foundation. I invite you to subscribe now and join us on this empowering journey of growth and leadership. Now, let's learn from the best and drive meaningful change together.
Hello, and welcome to the Learning from Leaders podcast. I am your host, Lili Clark, and our guest today is Cullum Clark. He is an expert in economic growth and development. He spent 25 years in the investment industry and then went on to earn his PhD in economics from SMU. He has since served as the director of the George W. Bush Institute-SMU Economic Growth Initiative. He also happens to be my dad, which is very fitting as this episode will be released right around Father's Day. So with that, happy Father's Day, and let's get started.
Thanks, Lily. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you too. So to get us started, we'll start off just learning more about your background and your current role. So could you tell us more about the Bush Institute and the Economic Growth Initiative, what you all are focused on, and how it fits into the broader mission of the Institute?
Sure. The George W. Bush Institute, Lily, is the think tank and, as President Bush likes to say, do tank arm of the George W. Bush Presidential Center. This also includes a wonderful museum on the Bush presidency. I urge all the listeners to visit. The Bush Institute is in the business of basically applying certain what we think of as timeless American values to pressing issues of our own time, values like freedom and opportunity. So we address a wide variety of very current issues. My own job is leading the economic policy part of the place. So the Bush Institute-SMU Economic Growth Initiative is what we call the economic policy part of the Bush Institute, operating in close partnership with SMU. SMU faculty have played an integral role in a lot of the work we've done.
Okay, and on the SMU note, you did decide after 25 years in investing to go back and earn your PhD. Could you tell us more about how you decided to go back to school after those years and have a career change?
You know, as long as I can remember, I've always somehow admired people who managed to remain lifelong learners and oftentimes reinvented themselves once or maybe more than once in the course of their adult lifetimes. Somehow that just always seemed like those people always seemed interesting to me. I had a really good 25-year run in the investment industry, and I still get to touch the investment industry in various ways. Among other things, I'm on SMU's investment committee. But you know, I think that I had a real hankering to be on a steeper learning curve again, to learn some new things and take on some new challenges. Why I chose this, you know, it was a little bit of an eccentric thing to do. I think you and your sisters and your mom were all very supportive, and that meant a lot to me. I think that I always had a kind of inner academic who was trying to break out. You know, I was always in the business world. By the standards of people who did investment stuff, I would say, very into history, very into big economic ideas, reading about it all the time, trying to apply it in the investment industry. And all that was good, but I think I had a real desire for a new challenge. And so I'm just, I thank my lucky stars that I not only was able in a position to go through a PhD program, it was hard, but very rewarding. But then to have this opportunity at the George W. Bush Institute to essentially think big thoughts and try to communicate them to the world about how we can essentially build a better country and tackle a lot of the problems of our own time. So it's really rewarding work. I also get to teach students as an adjunct professor at SMU, mostly college seniors, and that's a lot of fun too. It keeps me young.
Well, one of the things that is very unique about the particular economic growth initiative you're working on is this collaboration between the Bush Institute and SMU. Can you talk more about how this collaboration works in practice and how the two institutions are working together on topics like economic growth, inclusive growth, urban economics?
Sure. Well, there's a natural synergy between, I would say, university researchers and think tank people. They tend to bring different strengths to the table. So academic researchers tend to be operating at the cutting edge of the frontier of their field, exploring new things, oftentimes using new methods in science. Oftentimes that's very involved, equipment-wise, costs a great deal of money to do cutting-edge research. Even in economics, you're typically involved, oftentimes talking about big data, complex methods, and the great strength is those methods yield new insights about how the world works. On the other hand, academics aren't necessarily particularly well trained at translating all of this cutting-edge information into plain English in a way that is usable in the world.
Right.
Think tank people are the very opposite of that. On the whole, we aren't doing totally original research at the cutting edge. We're in the business of translating the best ideas out there into practical form. What's the policy program? What could government do differently? What could philanthropists do differently? What could business do differently based on this knowledge? And if we're good at the think tank business, and I'm very fortunate the Bush Institute most definitely is, then we're going to be good at packaging it clearly and communicating it well and to a lot of people and to the right people that we're trying to influence.
Okay. Well, we are very much in an exciting time in North Texas as we've seen a huge amount of economic growth in our region. Could you talk about why we have experienced such growth in our region here in North Texas recently?
Well, the stars have really aligned for the Dallas-Fort Worth area in a lot of respects. One simple fact in kind of the economic geography of America is we've had a great movement of people and businesses over the last several decades. The single most important movement has been from the coasts and the upper Midwest to the Sun Belt and to a certain degree to the mountain states. That's just a very powerful movement. It's been going a long time. There's also been a significant movement from core cities to somewhat more suburban type locations. Amidst all this movement, also, generally speaking, the large have mostly become larger. There are exceptions. A couple of the very biggest cities in the United States, New York City and LA, those metropolitan areas actually have shrunk a little in recent years. But on the whole, to operate in the modern economy at let's say, the cutting edge of innovation, to be a great place to do business, on the whole, you've got to be big. So big in the Sun Belt, then add to that very business-friendly policies, a place that is very welcoming to private enterprise at a time when a lot of other places don't have very good reputations for that. All of those things are important. I would say they all help a lot. Another factor is great transportation network, DFW Airport, and so on. But lastly, perhaps without this ingredient, it wouldn't have worked, and that is affordable quality of life. That people are generally moving from more expensive places because they want to be able to afford whatever their version of the American dream is. And that's just, although we've had a lot of increase in housing prices in Dallas, it's still a lot more affordable here than on the West Coast or the Northeast. So you put all that together. No one factor explains all the difference, but you put it together, and a few places like the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the Austin area, Houston area, Atlanta, we're just gonna boom, and they are doing so.
Right. So you just released a very detailed report on eds and meds institutions and their role in catalyzing the growth of various innovation districts across the country. Could you just tell us more about your work and some of your key findings?
Sure. So it's a big report. Try to be really concise, which, as you know, isn't always my strength.
Concise has led to a 200-page report.
Well, there's a lot of footnotes in there. They take up some of the pages and chart and tables. But by eds and meds institutions, we mean universities and academic medical centers. Why do we write this report? A couple basic propositions. We live in an increasingly knowledge-centric economy, knowledge-generating institutions that are doing the basic science that then turns into the products of the future, play a bigger role than they have ever played in our economy. We show this in the report. We show that places that have a really thriving eds and meds sector are doing better than other places. The research at those institutions leads to more business sector R&D. It leads to higher salaries, more businesses being created. In every possible way, it adds to prosperity. But there's a second issue, and that is that I'm really convinced that America's universities and to some degree academic medical centers are at a crossroads. They are in need of reform and modernization. It's a sector that goes back, I think Harvard University was founded in, I believe, 1636 or something like that. It's a sector that time and time again has sometimes not changed with the times. It comes to a place where it's in a kind of a crisis, and out of that crisis, some institutions fail to modernize, and they go out of business or shrink a lot. Other institutions do modernize, they go on to have a bright new future. And new disruptive players come in, and they're part of the change too. So I think we've come to one of those moments of crisis. For all kinds of reasons, the confidence the American people have in our universities is at a low ebb. All kinds of reasons for that we can discuss, but I'm not really interested in this report in trying to thoroughly dissect all the things that have maybe gone wrong in recent times. I think we're much more interested at the Bush Institute in being part of the solution. So what is our report doing? It is very much aimed at being part of the solution. It outlines, in I think a lot of detail, as you implied, an agenda for modernizing the modern research university or its close cousin, academic medical center, the place that is a medical school with a lot of medical research and typically patient care as well. So we organize our kind of modernization agenda into three buckets: improving talent development pipelines, promoting innovation in the wider economy, and creating great places that help create more prosperous cities. And so we have a lot of data on each of those three. The headline of those three, the talent development side, very simply, we live in an economy when we need the vast majority of the American people to come out of their educational years with skills that are useful in what increasingly we'll call the mid-21st century economy. We built our higher ed sector really historically to educate a small elite for a small number of elite professions. We're part of the way through that, modernization, that move towards greater inclusion, towards trying to address a much more sophisticated, complex economy through higher ed. We have not anywhere close to arrived yet. There's a lot of work to be done. The whole ecosystem of community colleges, four-year institutions, post-secondary programs that give a credential or something, a certification. Terribly complex world. It is changing. It needs a lot more change. The innovation front, we have a lot to say about what it means for a university to maximize its innovation impact on the broader world, which is to say, to take the great science it might be doing and to, in some sense, spread that to the world in a way that creates new products that transform human lives, improve the human experience, whether in healthcare, technology, clean energy, what have you. So broadly speaking, what we really are arguing is that universities should, in a sense, become less ivory tower and more a kind of open community, much more closely interacting with the wider economy. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Among other things, some things are kind of quite specific, like how to optimize the technology transfer office, like the part of the university that would license out technologies to, say, a biotech company or something. Some of it is much more institution-wide. How do you create a whole culture that values innovation and entrepreneurship in a setting that, to be frank, sometimes in traditional academic institutions, they oftentimes regard the idea of entrepreneurship as kind of grubby, as not really central to the institution. We argue that stepping up the entrepreneurship element doesn't detract from the basic research. They're what in economics we call complements, not substitutes. They make each other stronger. On the place side, to say one more thing, and then maybe we can say more about this topic. Universities typically have large physical footprints, oftentimes in big cities or in college towns. The decisions they make about land use, about the built environment, strongly affect the way that whole place develops. So we have a lot to say about how to, let's say, use that footprint for good in some cases, some of the traditional university real estate should probably actually shrink as we maybe do more things online and so forth. But we do talk about an area, a kind of land use that is growing very fast, and that is the urban innovation district. So here we're talking about the kind of place, you can draw a line around it on a map, a very specific place that is meant to bring together university researchers, yes, but also entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, a vast ecosystem, all oriented towards driving innovation forward, typically in close proximity to one another, mixing the university researchers with other kinds of people. So we have a lot to say about innovation districts, and I hope we can keep talking about that here.
Sounds good. Could you talk about some of the examples of leading innovation districts that we have here in North Texas? And one of the nuances that I'd love for you to touch on is particularly with kind of this place-based idea, to what degree are innovation districts happening kind of naturally once you get the right people in one space versus kind of a very intentional, curated set of activities or action items?
It's a great question, Lily, and a complex one. Let's see, let me just say what's happening in North Texas first. The North Texas area was a little bit slow to this space, but having arrived, we're playing catch up very aggressively, and I think with very good results. So the first formal innovation districts, and when I say formal, meaning you can find there's a line on the map, there was a ribbon cutting at the beginning, the mayor showed up and said, we're creating something new. Maybe they created some kind of special district with special tax treatment or what have you. The first two remain probably the two most important and consequential ones in the United States. Kendall Square in Cambridge, Massachusetts, essentially right across the street from MIT's front door, and Research Triangle Park in the Raleigh-Durham area, which interestingly was the classic suburban office park, but is urbanizing. They're in a sense creating a new downtown, kind of halfway between downtown Raleigh and downtown Durham. We didn't really have anything at all like this in North Texas until you could say we had the beginnings of it with something called the Telecom Corridor, mostly in Richardson, Texas, in the 1990s. That's been through a lot of morphing, if you will. That's a long story. But that was emblematic of its times because it was a kind of suburban office park kind of thing. It wasn't even really an office park like Research Triangle Park. It just so happened that a bunch of big suburban office buildings operated by companies like Nortel, Nokia, Ericsson, and so forth were in relatively close proximity to each other, and that created some positive synergy effects, although nobody planned one single location. The telecom equipment industry went through a kind of dark time in the early 21st century. That went into decline. I would say there's a really nice renaissance in Richardson going on. That's a longer story. But what's happened more recently is the emergence of the much more intentionally planned type of innovation district. And the leading example is the one that you and Lili Hill Philanthropies, Lili Hill, Nicole Small, and you all's whole team are involved in making happen, indeed, at Pegasus Park.
Not biased at all in planting this question.
No, of course not. But Pegasus Park, we can say you could draw a line around it on a map. We're talking about a very particular place with a clear master plan, clear intentions. As is oftentimes the case with innovation districts, there is a kind of multiplicity of players. So it's not the sort of thing where there's one real estate developer who just does the whole thing as a real estate play. Generally speaking, that always fails. It's also not UT, although it's close to UT Southwestern and has a heavy biotech bent to it, it's also not the case that it's just a University of UT Southwestern real estate play. Like, let's just build out some traditional academic buildings. Not that at all. So what's notable about it is this remarkable mixing of biotech, of social innovation organizations of various kinds, lots of different things happening in this small campus that are really exciting, and it's been a spectacular success. And I think you all's organization deserves a whole lot of credit for what you brought to Dallas. We have a couple other initiatives afoot. There's a potential initiative in Plano being planned by NextPoint that also aims to focus on healthcare. And then I think if we define innovation district a little bit broadly, we could also say that in Frisco, I think there's a very interesting emphasis on big time sports and sports medicine. And that they have a plausible claim to be on a path to being the national or global leader in that in that space, which is not a small space. So I don't personally think it's a bad thing that there's several players around the DFW area, maybe specializing in different things. I know you and I've talked about this. I hope that we'll not only have a thriving biotech sector in the form of actual like drug discovery, drug development. I hope that we'll have a biomanufacturing sector, which is to say the actual manufacturing of, say, biological drugs. But if we have that, it probably won't be in the heart of the city of Dallas. It would probably be in a suburban type location where land is cheaper and you can build a pretty big facility. So that would be a different kind of innovation location. So the beauty of what's going on in Dallas-Fort Worth is you have this incredibly diverse range of industries spread across a pretty big area, bigger than the state of Massachusetts. If you just take the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area, 13 counties, with a lot of interesting things happening. I think Pegasus Park is the beating heart of the innovation economy in North Texas right now, but there are a lot of pockets, and that range and diversity is good for the region. Now, you asked about intentional versus just happen, and I think that is a really interesting kind of distinction. And I would argue that most likely either extreme is likely to struggle. It kind of has to be some of both. So I'm an economist. We tend to have a lot of respect for markets, for the market working itself out over time. It so happens that in the whole history of cities in America, and in fact cities around the world, there has long been a tendency, long before anyone ever planned it, for firms that do certain kind of technically advanced things to congregate in fairly close locations. You've heard me say this before, but if you were in the early 19th century New York or Chicago, and you were thinking about starting a textile manufacturing firm, if you observed that there was one part of town, like the garment district in New York or something, I'm being a little bit anachronistic because that came later, and there were 10 textile manufacturing facilities right near each other, and you're thinking, where shall I put mine, the 11th? It's highly probable that if you were a good businesswoman, you would put it really close to the other 10. And that took no plan on the part of the mayor of New York City or anything like that. It's because it just makes sense for certain kinds of activities to operate in relative density. All of those textile manufacturing plants would draw on the same pool of skilled workers. They would draw on the same pool of suppliers, the same transportation networks to move their product out. So things just happen. And there's a kind of magic to the market economy that is, in a sense, smarter than any planner. And I would argue that any successful innovation district today is going to allow that market interplay to happen. You start it, you don't quite know what's going to happen. Let me give you an example. Research Triangle Park and other places like it have found that over the last several years, there's actually been a major shift in their tenant roster and who's actually there. What's happened? Very simply, big decline in the number of IT companies, big increase in the number of biotech companies. Did they plan for that? Probably not. Why did it happen? Because along came a pandemic that no one saw coming. We ran a giant experiment in work from home, and it turns out the industry that you can most support remote working in is like software coding. And a whole lot of IT companies gave up a lot of office space, including in really attractive innovation districts. Biotech is different. Not many people conduct sophisticated life science experiments, in their home.
Need to show up to the lab.
Got to show up to the lab. And it turned out there was a whole lot of demand for lab space in these kind of dense areas of a whole lot of talent in a relatively close place. So that was allowing the market to work. Nobody saw the pandemic coming, but if you were the manager of an innovation district and you said, oh no, we must have a certain percentage IT, we will turn away the next biotech company, you'd be in trouble. So you got to let the world sort of develop. But I do think there's an important side to what is intentional also. So here's I think maybe to tell that story a little bit. What I think the special sauce of innovation districts that work is lots of different organizations and lots of different talented people coming together in very close proximity so that different kinds of ideas bounce into each other and produce new ideas. So part of that means it's easy to say all these different people should just kind of hang out at, for example, like the water cooler in Pegasus and trade ideas. And that is a valuable thing. That's what you want to happen. But how do you actually get there? Well, you suddenly you have these big, sometimes clunky organizations. You have like a university, but a university is a complex institution if ever there was one. So sometimes they're big employers. Real estate has its own peculiarities. So the issue is you want all those things to come together in one place and figure out how to plan this area together, and to actually get like university administrators to plan alongside real estate developers and venture capitalists and small business operators, entrepreneurs, and so forth. They got to actually sit down together and figure it out together. Some things just aren't going to happen unless they figure it out together, which is why a growing number of successful innovation districts have organized governance methods to bring these people together routinely to figure out problems together. So I think it's really, you got to have a good dose of both.
Okay. Well, to what degree do you think, when you think about all of the ingredients that make a successful innovation district, are they pretty replicable across cities? Like, could you say, okay, the factors that make an innovation district in North Texas can also make an innovation district successful in Chicago or in North Carolina or in Boston? And what are the factors, taking North Texas as an example, that you think can really be value additive? Like maybe it's at Pegasus Park, the access to 2 major airports, or being in the middle of the country. How do you think about the components of an innovation district that across all of the major successful ones that you've seen have really added to their success? And what are the things that might be unique to our region?
Before you have anything else, there's one thing you got to have to make an innovation district work, and that's innovative ideas. So innovative ideas can crop up any place, of course, and no doubt have oftentimes arisen in the most improbable of places. But there is a certain geographic concentration to the kind of large-scale industrial production of ideas in the modern economy. So one major place that ideas are created is in major research universities. So this figures in our report in a lot of detail. We look at and quantify what we call the innovation impact of, it so happens we have a data set with 177 universities. And we look at a lot of metrics like patents being issued, licenses signed with outside companies, license revenue that comes back once the companies start commercializing a product, a university's papers being cited in other people's patents. There's a lot of metrics. Okay, so about 50-odd research universities account for well over half of all of the output of innovative ideas, if you will, from the whole university sector. So it would be tough to produce what the kind of innovation district that we're writing about in the report, that is typically STEM-based, that is in some form about translating science, cutting-edge science, into new products. It would be hard to do that all that far from one of those institutions, because we've kind of worked out this system in the United States. We really kind of worked it out, also with great intentionality, I might say, during and shortly after World War II. We created a sort of a three-way system in which the federal government funds a whole lot of the basic science that takes place in this country. Researchers working for typically universities or maybe research institutes of some sort, but not federal employees, do most of the basic science. And then they transfer those ideas to the private, for-profit sector, which does most of the, you could say, the D part of R&D, the developing actual products based on the science. That's been a wonderfully successful model, the most successful model for large-scale innovation we've ever seen in the history of the world. But there's a truth kind of at the very heart of that, and that is that ideas travel best at short distance. Every one of those handoffs tends to work best if it's not across great distance, despite all the wonders of our modern communication system. So you really do have to have some basic science being done pretty close by. So as I said, there's about 50 institutions. Sometimes in a few big cities, there's more than one in the same city, like Columbia and NYU in New York City, or Stanford and Cal Berkeley, for example. And of course, the Dallas area is blessed with several institutions that are all doing important work, different sizes, different fields. But it would be tough to do this far removed from those. That doesn't mean only big cities, though. Here's two great examples. Texas A&M and Kansas State University are two superpowers in biology for agriculture. Neither of those, Manhattan, Kansas, College Station, Texas, are not giant cities, but are they amenable to a successful innovation district? Probably one with a heavy ag-bio focus. Yes, they are. So when you look at the total number of places this could happen, it actually covers a pretty big swath of the country. So that's the most important thing. Beyond that, building up a homegrown business sector, I think, can happen anywhere as long as you just allow it to happen. as long as you don't sort of squelch it somehow. One of the most, let's say, the bottlenecks in the whole innovation economy is experienced management. So people who know how to, let's say, turn science into a drug that is approved at the FDA and bring it to patients. Management is a scarce resource. There's more of it in a handful of big places that have a long history of creating successful companies in this or that sector, more than any place else in the San Francisco Bay Area, the Boston area, New York, some other places. Dallas-Fort Worth is an up-and-comer in this. We're not in probably the first rank of the first 4 or 5. We're certainly in the next rank, and we're gaining on those folks that are ahead of us. But building out that business talent, part of it, you hope you grow it at home. You also probably want to import it by making your city a great place to live, work, great place to do business, great place to raise a family, if that's on your mind, whatever it is you want to do to achieve your version of the American dream, be a great place to offer that. I think that Dallas-Fort Worth has benefited a very great deal. I mean, we have a couple things wrong with us, like it's too hot in July and August, but on the whole, it's a place that scores pretty high for giving people a reasonable, affordable quality of life, and therefore a great many talented executives, not to mention other kinds of talented people, have been moving here, and thus that bottleneck that we would have faced in the past in Dallas, it's growing less constraining. We have more and more entrepreneurial and managerial talent here. So that makes me very optimistic about the future here. But there are a lot of places that could do it. There are places where there's really successful universities where there isn't any identifiable innovation district yet. I think that there can be great good in America going forward as smaller college towns, maybe some of the old industrial cities of the Midwest that had fading manufacturing industries, but actually in some cases really good universities could probably achieve turnarounds based on that. Pittsburgh is an example that arguably is a kind of a nascent or a reasonably successful turnaround. So I'm very hopeful that this innovation economy it probably can't operate literally in every county of the country to all that great a degree, but it can operate in many, many cities of various sizes.
Yeah. So what does the data say about how North Texas is doing when it comes to driving innovation?
So the Dallas-Fort Worth area, when you're talking about innovation, you can look at several things. You can look at how are the actual universities doing at producing the basic science. Then you can go kind of downstream in the innovation chain and look at how much business R&D is going on here. And then beyond that, you could just look at the general, rise in well-being and living standards. To what degree is the economy prospering? The universities, first of all. Again, I think we started a little bit late relative to some places, but we've been gaining on them, gaining on the Bostons and the Bay Areas and so on. Long ways to travel there to fully catch up. But if you look at our report, looks at what we call the innovation impact. And while we have data at the level of individual institutions, we can add up how's the whole metropolitan area doing. And the Dallas-Fort Worth area is I think, a solid 7th or 8th biggest in the innovation impact of all its universities. But we're also the 4th biggest metropolitan area. So relative to the size of our population, we actually punch a little bit below our weight. But like I said, I think we're gaining on some of the ones that are ahead of us because we have seen so much investment in our local institutions. We've seen such growth in, say, the R&D budget of UT Southwestern or UT Dallas, UT Arlington, SMU. They're all growing faster than the higher ed sector as a whole in their research spending and their output. So that's good. Business R&D. We're a metropolitan area that is absolutely booming, but we're only a medium player for being home to a whole lot of business R&D. I think that we're likely to grow there if we don't blow it. But in many cases, we have companies that have a lot of operations here, but let's say the heart of the innovation engine is someplace else. We need to convince those companies to decide this is not just a great place to have a big sales operation or a back office operation, like there's huge banking back office operations in North Texas, but a great place to actually have your major R&D center. We have some across a very diverse range of industries. We need to build up more on that. So I'd say we're good, but not where we want to be on that. But then finally you have, to what degree is the whole place prospering? And this is finally a really good place to do business, a great place to build a company. What we see is a gigantic flow of companies relocating, above all from the West Coast to Texas. And when they come to Texas, they mostly come to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the Austin area, to a somewhat lesser degree, the Houston area. Those are the dominant destinations. So Dallas-Fort Worth is hands down, far and away, the national leader for attracting corporate relocations.
And talent as well, right?
And talent, absolutely. It's hands down the leader in just attracting people from elsewhere in the United States, obviously including a huge range of talents and backgrounds and so on. So when you put all that together, I'd say when it's all said and done, what's going to drive the innovation ecosystem is the talent of the human beings here. And we are attracting a great many great human beings who have a lot to offer and want to do great things in their careers. So it's hard not to be optimistic about the trend we're on.
Okay, so I want to go back to the Dallas, Austin, Houston dynamic for a minute.
Sure.
Because prior to your innovation district work, you've spent a lot of time thinking about the Texas Triangle. So I'm curious, when you're thinking about, talent decisions or company decisions to come to Texas, what are your takeaways on how they might be thinking about these different regions of Texas and the different major cities of Texas as places to relocate to?
Yeah, so you've referred to the Texas Triangle, and I've had the good fortune to co-author a book called The Texas Triangle with three wonderful co-authors, Henry Cisneros, David Hendricks, and Bill Fulton. Came out in 2021. And the Texas Triangle is the mega region, as we call it, formed by the four big metropolitan areas of our state: Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. And what we really argue in the book is it makes sense to actually think of that whole area as a mega region rather than just as four disparate places that are kind of happen to be part of the same state, but other than that have little in common. They actually have a lot in common. They're interconnected in all kinds of economic ways, as we show in the book. And they have ultimately, they're going to rise or fall together, and lately they've been rising. So when we talk about relocation of companies and people to Texas, we're really talking about relocation to the Texas Triangle. If you look at the metropolitan areas of the state and you rank them by size, of course, Dallas-Fort Worth is first, Houston second. If you get down to below the top four, the next 12 put together, a lot of really nice places, great places to live. Collectively, they've actually grown less in population terms than metropolitan America as a whole, like of the urban part of the United States. And for all practical purposes, essentially 100% of the corporate relocations that have happened coming to Texas have been coming to the Texas Triangle. So the Texas Triangle, the numbers break down very neatly. The state has about 30 million people. About 20 million of them live in the Texas Triangle, so 2/3. Vast majority of the economic growth and the population growth. Again, I mentioned earlier, Lili, it helps to be big. It's a big, complex economy with a very great deal of specialization, countless areas of skills, countless occupations. To be at the cutting edge of, building a really successful urban economy, you kind of have to have really a lot of people doing really a lot of things. And that just necessarily means being kind of big. So the Texas Triangle metropolitan areas have managed bigness better than most other places. Southern California, which was undoubtedly a more prosperous place than the Texas Triangle in the latter half of the 20th century, did a lot of things right for a time, but they reached a point where they started managing bigness not so well. And so you get the kind of the famous smog and gigantic traffic jams of Los Angeles and so forth. Thus far, we've managed bigness better than most places, but we still have a lot of challenges because we're still growing pretty fast.
Okay. Well, when you were looking at innovation districts across cities of America, you've studied a lot of them closely. How are they doing as an overall class across our country?
Glad you asked, because in our report, we have a first of its kind Bush Institute-SMU data set on 36 innovation districts. And these include the longest established ones, like Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, Kendall Square in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and right up to very recently created ones, like when did Pegasus really start filling out?
2021.
2021. So we have data that is quite new. So we have a range in there, 36. There are, depending on how you count it, somewhere between probably 60 and maybe 120 places that could legitimately be called innovation districts in the United States. It depends how you define them. It's hard to build a comprehensive list because a lot of places would claim to be that might not quite meet the usual definitions. But the 36 undoubtedly are all innovation districts in the sense that they call themselves that. They're members of certain organizations. They're on the website. There's in every case a website and an organized effort to attract business and promote innovation there. So how are they doing? What our data set does is it looks at how these places are doing as engines of economic development and urban placemaking. One footnote in this, it's actually really hard to say how they're doing at literally promoting innovation because it's very hard to pin down on a map where this or that innovation really takes place. But we can look at, are people moving there and living there? Are jobs being created there? Those things we can look at. So the bottom line, the headline, if you will, is America's innovation districts are performing really well. What does our data show? It shows that the population who live quite close by is growing faster than in surrounding metropolitan areas and faster than in the cities of the United States as a whole. They are proving quite successful at creating high concentrations of highly educated people, but also people with a range of educational backgrounds. So, for example, they're outperforming for attracting people who have an associate degree, but not a bachelor degree or a PhD, which means they're creating a lot of different kinds of jobs nearby for a range of people who bring very different kind of skills to bear. They are far outperforming their surrounding cities and metropolitan America as a whole for creating new housing, which allows more people to live relatively close by. They are far outperforming the cities of the United States for holding down commuting times. Nobody likes a long commute, right? So a real measure of the success of urban economic development efforts is, are you holding down commutes, which means, is there a pretty significant number of people in your city who can live and work in reasonable close proximity? That's almost kind of at the heart of creating successful economic development. And they are hands down massively outperforming other parts of the cities of America on those metrics. So they also have achieved much faster than average growth in income levels for people who live nearby. As you've heard me say, this is, it's hard to disentangle how much of that reflects highly skilled people moving into the area, and how much of it is people who already lived there going way back, seeing faster than average income growth for themselves and their families. I would say both are really good things, and they're both occurring. It's a little hard to say how much is each, but kind of on every metric, these are succeeding. We also look at how the office and lab real estate is doing as real estate, like for the people who own the buildings. And the answer is there's lots of demand. They're able to charge premium office rents relative to other kinds of office space. In a time when office real estate is in trouble in American cities, this is a subset of that asset class that is tremendously outperforming. An example is that you have told me about is Pegasus Park here in Dallas, where Pegasus welcomed biolabs, kind of a co-working space for biotech companies with a lot of value-added shared equipment and so on. And I think you also told me that it's been notable just how many companies surprised you by literally moving away from the Boston area or other parts of the United States to come to Dallas because the space is high quality, it's half the price, and in general, it's a great place to build a business, Pegasus and the Dallas area. So in general, these buildings are outperforming for occupancy, outperforming for rent. There is a lull right now. There is a bit of there's softness out there in the market, some cities much worse than others. That reflects the fact that we've had this big increase in interest rates. That has essentially, it's a whole chain of events that's choked off the exit market for venture capitalists, which means they're putting less money into new startup companies. Thus, like, for example, the startup biotech sector hasn't been having as much money pouring in, so they've been cautious about renting new office space. So there is softness, but every indicator suggests the underlying demand remains strong. We have not seen the peak of biotech investment in America or the creation of startups or the commercialization of cutting-edge science around the life science and medical world. By no means have we seen the peak. It's going to continue to grow. So we will get a normalization of interest rates, a resurgence of the venture capital industry because it's a cyclical industry, and demand for that space is likely to get pretty strong again. But it's much, much stronger in Dallas and some other Sunbelt locations such as Atlanta and Nashville, Houston, much stronger than it is in the very expensive coastal places like San Francisco Bay Area, LA, New York.
Okay. Well, all extremely interesting work. I do want to spend a few minutes on some of your community involvement here in North Texas outside of your day-to-day. So you've been involved in numerous organizations from Uplift, the McDermott Foundation, and many others. Can you talk a little bit about just what it's meant for you to be part of these organizations? Our audience on this podcast is a lot of younger leaders who are looking to get involved in our community in North Texas, eventually become really community leaders. So we'd love to just hear more about your experience and also your advice for those of us looking to increase our engagement in Dallas.
Well, we're really fortunate in Dallas. We have a really rich tradition of people who are successful in the business world or whatever it is they do in their day jobs, getting involved in the community, giving back, volunteering, going on boards, if they have the resources, giving money, but just getting involved in building a greater city. I think de Tocqueville said in the 1830s in Democracy in America, he came over from France and said he was kind of in shock at this very strong tendency of Americans to form associations, get together to try to solve local problems. Back in his native France, there was this idea of everyone just goes about their daily business and it's the government's problem to solve everything. In Dallas, we are like the epitome of this classic American tradition. I think more than most cities in the United States. You could debate why it is. I think maybe it has something to do with a kind of a frontier mentality that's never really left us, a mentality that has tended on the one hand to lead to very limited government, for better or for worse. Sometimes that's good news, sometimes that's not so good news. But the counterpoint to very limited government is this really strong sense of we got to band together and go out and solve this problem, whether operating at the level of a chamber of commerce or people who are, going to a church or synagogue together, just getting involved together to address some problem in a particular neighborhood. So it's a very rich tradition in Dallas. People who come from the outside are always kind of surprised at how very fast they will get invited to get involved in things and join boards. And for any really, I think, hardworking, enterprising young person who really shows they want to get involved, their main problem is not going to be to convince someone to let them in. It's going to be to figure out which ones to turn down. So what has it meant to me? I have been very, very fortunate. My wife, your mom, and I both grew up here. We feel great, feel very grounded in this community. We know a lot of people, a lot of great people, and that's given us all kinds of opportunities. Maybe if we'd come from elsewhere, we still would have had pretty good opportunities, but we probably had even more because of our origins here. In countless ways, being involved has been rewarding. It's been interesting. It has intellectually broadened me. It has brought many great people. Many of my closest friendships into my life have come from being involved in this or that community organization outside of my day job kind of career. And of course, it's very fulfilling to actually try to make a difference in the world. So I've been part of making a difference. You brought up the McDermott Foundation, the Eugene McDermott Foundation, which founded by Eugene McDermott, one of the co-founders of Texas Instruments. It is a classic story of what probably is the most consequential company in the history of Dallas. All of the founders had this, they all came from elsewhere, built the company, had this incredible civic mindedness. Every one of them got extremely involved in building the great institutions of Dallas. And Eugene McDermott passed away in 1973, but the company, the foundation, I should say, that bears his name under his wife, Margaret McDermott, and under their daughter, Mary McDermott Cook, our current president, and now Grace, the next generation down, Mary's daughter, all maintaining that degree of involvement. So I'm privileged to be involved. We have had the great privilege of giving away really a lot of money, oftentimes kind of like the first significant gift to some new effort in Dallas. So we've seen enormous good happen, and I've had the great privilege of being part of that for 23 years. Lately, I've had a run of 8 years on the board of Uplift Education, which is the leading public charter school network in North Texas. I've now been 2 years as the board chair, rolling off in a couple months. Incredibly rewarding to see educational innovation operating at large scale in the Dallas area, 23,000 kids. It's always kind of awe-inspiring to see how much good is done every day by so many people engaged in that enterprise. And by the way, not just Uplift, in raising up the educational enterprise of our region for all the kids in North Texas, however it's done, is just a really rewarding thing to be a part of. So out of that, I've learned a lot. It does inform my day job, but I think I've been able, in a small way. Governance is important. Being involved in a board, it's kind of interesting. I'd tell any of your listeners, when you have a chance, if you're so fortunate in this world to get involved in some kind of governance, governance is the kind of thing it's a sneaky sort of, it's a thing that you can go an extended period of time and wonder, why exactly are we coming to all these board meetings and hearing like finance reports and so on? Am I really doing any good? But then actually you do it for a while and you look back in my case, on all that I've learned and realize, oh my goodness, governance is actually really, really important. All of that sitting around and kind of looking over the shoulder of management and just continuing to ask good questions and build, be an external champion for the organization, it adds up over time. Oftentimes, I think it's oftentimes said that people will significantly overestimate how much change will occur in, say, a year. Whatever it is they're trying to do, they'll overestimate it. But you give it 20 years, they'll dramatically underestimate how much will be achieved. So when you stay at these things long enough, really quite remarkable change happens. And I've been privileged to be a part of that.
That's great. Well, I have a question that we ask to all of our guests, which is, who is a leader or mentor in your life that has really influenced your leadership style or influenced how you think about what a really strong community leader is?
I've been fortunate. I've had some really good mentors, but maybe among the most important, perhaps the most important I ever had, was your late grandfather, Vin Prothro. And he was kind of legendary as a mentor. He was one of the early entrepreneurs in the semiconductor industry in Texas and in our country. But there was a D Magazine article, I think it was, written up on him called The Mentor. So he was very good at it. So I was very close to my father-in-law, and we had a great many conversations on many, many things. Oftentimes had these really long bike rides together, covered a lot of ground. So he was, of course, always very supportive of me, and that's, you always appreciate that in a father or mother-in-law. My mother-in-law has been very, very supportive too. What did I learn from him? He had all these kind of aphorisms. He would say, for example, get it right the first time. That's really, really valuable advice. He always said, it was kind of funny, he would say, learn to count. And that's a little bit of a silly way to put it in a way, like everyone knows how to count, but he means like literally understand the math, understand the numbers, if it's relevant, understand the accounting, the finances, in some form or another, understand what's really going going on in whatever you're involved in any quantitative sense. And I think he also was very much a believer in kind of straight shooting. Tell it like it is. It doesn't mean be casually cruel to people or something. I mean, be respectful, but at some level, if there's something that needs to be improved out there, just go out and say it straight. And I think he embodied all those things, and he very much that rubbed off on me. I think I'm a very different person, a different leader, to the extent I've had an opportunity to be involved in leading some things because of some of those lessons.
That's very, very good advice. And on that note, to wrap up, we have a brief round of rapid fire questions. So just one or two words, whatever comes to mind. Okay. First of all, favorite Dallas restaurant?
Wabi House Ramen.
Oh, okay.
I got to surprise you too.
Yeah, I know. We haven't been to that one together. So what is the best coffee in Dallas?
Ooh. Gosh, I don't want to offend anybody. LDU or Ascension?
Okay.
What do you think?
Merit.
Merit's very good too.
Okay, what's your favorite place that you've ever traveled to?
I would say New Mexico, the Santa Fe area.
Okay. If you could have dinner with one historical figure, who would it be?
Abraham Lincoln.
What book are you currently reading?
Let's see. I always read several books at the same time. It's kind of a
it's
kind of a personality flaw. Let's see. I am reading several books about housing. I'm very interested in how we solve this housing problem in America. There was a very nice book by a Brookings economist named Jenny Schuetz called Fixer Upper. Pretty nice diagnosis of what we need to do in America. But I read really a lot of books. That's one other bit of advice I would have for your listeners is always be a lifelong learner, always be a reader.
Okay. What is your favorite TV show that you're watching or have watched recently?
I loved Game of Thrones, but that's over. Recently, I've liked For All Mankind, very interesting view of what the future might have looked like or might yet look like. We've just watched Shogun. It's amazing. I lived in Japan for a time after college. I like Japanese culture a lot. It's an amazing production. And now, actually, your mom and I are watching a show called The Three Body Problem, which is based on a novel, actually a trilogy, extremely scary, interesting view of what the future might hold, and they've done a really good job of making a TV show about it. So I would recommend that to anybody. I really like these things that kind of imagine what the future might look like, for better or for worse.
Yeah. What is the best band or artist currently in the music scene?
Me being on the older side, inevitably, I like some people who are kind of my vintage or a little bit older. So I'm really glad that Bruce Springsteen is still touring some. He's certainly one of the great artists of probably all of American history. Of the ones younger than me, my personal favorite is Brandi Carlile, as I think you know. Brandi and her bandmates are just an absolutely meteoric talent. Everybody should give them a listen.
Well, it was a fun game in my own head to just guess what you were going to say. And I got like 50% of them right, but that was the one. Okay, this is the last one. It's not fully fair. Caitlin Clark or Lili Clark?
Which one can make better three-pointer shots from the
objectively,
from the
Caitlin.
Line? What's the question? There's no question mark.
It can be rhetorical.
Well, needless to say, I am really, really proud of all of our daughters, you and Annabelle and Charlotte. And from a distance, I am a great admirer of Caitlin Clark's phenomenal basketball ability. She had a great run, and looking forward to watching her in the WNBA.
Well, she'll be in Dallas very soon.
I'd sure like to see her play in person. I'm a big fan.
Okay, well, in conclusion, thank you so much for taking the time. The knowledge and insights are extremely valuable to our listeners, and fun for me to bring some of our dinner conversations to the podcast. So to our audience, thank you so much for listening, and we very much look forward to our future discussions with various Dallas leaders in the next couple of episodes.
Well, keep up the great work, Lily. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for listening to Learning from Leaders. If you enjoyed this episode, we invite you to subscribe now for monthly episode drops so that you can continue to learn from experienced business and community leaders to help you drive meaningful change in your community.